ways if it's working. Do that. Nah, it's gonna take I hate living here. Mobile homes, please. I was actually easier to get out this way. It really was. So I was taking out the other way. So. Let's see if I can do this.
This is her opportunity to show that, she's for the heartland of America. She's part of that Biden centrist agenda. But yes, these opening steps are very
Gas on top of it. Wait till I come back.
In the eyes of American voters.
Well, to that point, Jim, to what extent does she need to hold her experience with this administration close, and to what extent should some things be kept at arm's length, including, frankly, the president himself, who called into campaign headquarters while she was there yesterday, talked about how he would be joining her on the trail, even if he's not on the ticket. He said he'd be very engaged in the effort. How engaged, if you were advising the campaign, would you suggest that she should be to actually harbor the ties too close at times?
Particularly among Democrats, but the biggest issue with Biden was his age. If he was 71 years old, not 81 years old, he would be winning this race hands down. In public opinion polls, people say, like, inflation was the number one issue. No, it was the number one policy issue. Biden's age was the number one issue. This is a presidency, including its accomplishments and the economy, not perfect, but the economy is good, that would re-elect an incumbent. So I think she can grasp onto that, but she also has to show she is her own person, her own leader. She will take the country in her own direction. So, look, there's a bit of a dance on this here, but Biden is an asset, unmistakably.
Well, and we're going to hear from the president himself tomorrow night, Jim. He says he'll be giving an Oval Office address to the nation at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to get that primetime speech that he had promised in his statement that he posted on social media when he was announcing he was no longer seeking re-election. What do you expect we'll hear from President Biden tomorrow as he tries to tell the nation not only what he's going to look to accomplish in the remaining 6 months of his presidency, but in some ways has a chance to define what he wants his legacy to be?
Yeah, it's part of that state legislature has decided not to run for re-election. I know there's some pressure, even before the debate, there's some pressure outside of the debate. You don't get to be president of the United States because of not thinking of your own future and legacy. So, my hope is that in this speech, the point that I'll make is, I felt that I had what it took to be president for another term, but I couldn't convince voters of that, and I have to accede to their wishes, and I'm going to fight for voters all the way through to the end. But I also feel this is kind of like an athlete, a Hall of Fame athlete, who announces a retirement, and you get celebrated. And I hope that's what happens with Joe Biden. He's had a remarkable career. He's had a remarkable presidency.
And considering that Harris is already on the campaign trail and all of this is happening before Joe Biden has actually had a chance to speak, when we hear from her and what we expect to hear less than 2 hours from now, how does she strike the balance of trying to recognize Biden and his legacy, not get ahead of his big address tomorrow, but also make the case for her own candidacy?
Well, look, I don't think she has to worry about getting ahead of Biden. She's out there making her case. You noted earlier, when the money is pouring in, the energy is pouring in. Her job is to show the American people that she can be president of the entire nation. That, she is part of that centrist bring energy and vigor to the presidency. She will highlight some of the issues that are particularly dear to her, definitely
That's a good
choice
shirt.
in healthcare. And she also has to show the American people that she will be a good steward of the economy. She does not have a record previous to being in the White House of strong views on the economy that voters have heard. She now has 3.5 years in the infrastructure bill, the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, other pieces of legislation that made so that more Americans are working today than ever in history. The stock market is at an all-time high. Oil drilling in 2023 beat all records for the United States or any country. I think she has to have those things as well.
All right, Jim, always great to have you here on Bloomberg. Appreciate your time. Jim Kessler, Democratic strategist and Executive Vice President for Policy at Third Way. Thank you. Coming up, we'll have more on the breaking news on the resignation of the Secret Service Director, Kimberly Schultz. Anywhere else you get your podcast, let's listen anytime.
And Android Auto. Download the Bloomberg Business app on your smartphone today. Then listen to us anywhere in the Bay Area, up and down the West Coast, and across the globe. Get it all. Live radio, podcasts, and hourly news updates on demand at the click of a button. The Bloomberg Business app, now with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto features. Download it free in the Apple App Store or on Google Play. Bloomberg Radio. Context changes everything.
When was the last time I took a road trip? How many national parks could I hit in 2 weeks? What about hotels? Wait, hey Erica, how much am I spending on travel?
When your questions about life turn into questions about money, there's Erica, the virtual financial assistant to help you spend, save, and plan smarter. Only from Bank of America. What would you like the power to do? Erica is only available in the English language. You must download the latest version of the mobile banking app, only available on select mobile devices. Your chat may be recorded and monitored for quality assurance. Message and data rates and additional terms may apply. Bank of America and a member FDIC.
If you listen carefully, you'll hear a rhythm in the market. Not just in the resonant echoes of the opening bell, but in the syncopations triggered by a volatile barrel of crude oil, or the decrescendo in the fall of the Russian ruble. The markets compose their own tunes, and once you learn to listen for them, you might catch yourself humming along. Bloomberg.com. Context changes everything.
Trying to understand Asia is like piecing together a giant jigsaw puzzle. 40 countries and more than 2,000 languages. Asia is home to some of the fastest growing economies, and it can be incredibly hard to cover this part of the world. So we're starting the Big Take Asia, a weekly news podcast from Bloomberg. I'm Juan Ha. I've been covering Asian news for more than a decade at Bloomberg. Listen to Big Take Asia every Wednesday, wherever you get your podcasts.
Join global business leaders and investors at the Bloomberg Sustainable Business Summit, returning to Singapore on July 31st. Take part in solutions-driven discussions on how to drive business value and unlock opportunity while remaining nimble in times of change and greater ESG accountability. Learn more at bloomberglive.com/sustainablebiz-singapore. That's bloomberglive.com/sustainablebiz-singapore.
Now, your 3-day weather forecast on Bloomberg 960.
Couple more days of hot weather coming up. Highs in the upper 70s and 80s near the Bay today. 90s and lower 100s inland. Clear tonight, low in the 60s. A little cooler in the North Bay. Lots of sun Wednesday. High in the 80s near the Bay. 90s inland. Mostly sunny skies Thursday. Not as hot. High in the 70s near the Bay. 80s and lower 90s further inland. I'm Scott Kaplan with your 3-day weather forecast on Bloomberg 960.
Global market news changes in an instant. So don't miss a minute. Listen to Bloomberg 960 anytime, anywhere around the world. On the iHeartRadio app. Tune in. The Bloomberg Business app. Sirius XM 121. And the Bloomberg Terminal. It's 12:21 on On Wall Street, we do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We've got stocks close to session highs. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ 100 index, all advancing down. Transports, however, are declining, down 1.5%. Right now, we got the S&P up 14, gain there of 0.2%. The S&P at 55.77. The Dow up 66, the gain right now of 0.2%. While the NASDAQ Composite Index is up 68, a gain there of 0.4%. 10-year at 4.22%, the 2-year 4.48%. Gold up $8 the ounce, up 0.3%, 24.04 right now. And West Texas Intermediate crude down almost 2%, 76.88 a barrel. Stocks are higher as traders wade through a deluge of corporate results for clues as to whether the market will be able to extend this year's record-breaking rally. Delta Airlines under investigation by government authorities after over its handling of a technology glitch that has led to thousands of canceled flights. Those cancellations, many continuing today. Delta Airlines, so little change of just under 0.1%. Earnings front and center after the close of trading, specifically big tech names. First, the Mag 7 checking in. Tesla ahead of earnings, down now by just about 1.7%. And Alphabet ahead of earnings, advancing by 0.4%. Again, recapping, S&P up now by 10 points, up 0.2%. Balance of power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here she is, Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. At this time yesterday here in Washington, we were watching what was a pretty contentious hearing in the House Oversight Committee as lawmakers grilled Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheatle about the failures in security last weekend in Pennsylvania when Donald Trump was shot in an assassination attempt. She, of course, faced bipartisan calls to resign, and today she has done so, saying in an email to staff, "I take full responsibility for the security lapse. In light of recent events, it is with a heavy heart that I have made the difficult decision to step down as your director." For more on this, Ellen Gilmer is joining us now. She is Bloomberg Government's Homeland Security and Immigration reporter. So, Ellen, we do know now that the director of the Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, has renamed an acting Secret Service director, Ronald Rowe. What else is going to happen next now that we at least have someone acting in place?
Well, the new acting director, Ronald Rowe, is obviously going to have a lot on his plate immediately. So he's somebody who's been at the Secret Service for nearly 25 years in a lot of leadership positions. And a lot of what he's going to be doing now is talking with lawmakers, talking with investigators from the whole universe of investigations that have started looking into this. There are independent reviews, there's an internal review, and he's going to have to try to restore confidence in the Secret Service. Obviously, the next bigger step would be to name permanent, or to name a next director. There are some senators who want that to be a Senate-confirmed position, which it is not right now.
So when we consider what role Congress has to play in this, even if they don't have to do the confirmation process, yesterday in that Oversight Committee hearing, she was pretty adamant, it seems like, that she was not going anywhere, that she wasn't stepping down. Do we have a sense of what exactly changed in just the last 24 hours that led to her resignation this morning?
Well, I think it was clear during that hearing that she didn't have confidence or support from either side of the aisle, and it's really hard to help an agency, as doing such a critical task as Secret Service, to navigate this kind of public scrutiny and these investigations with somebody who doesn't have the support of all the decision makers in Washington. So I think it was really just a matter of time. She did the hearing, she made her case, she explained as much as she was willing to explain about the events of July 13th. It wasn't enough to win anybody over, and that was clear by the end of the day.
Well, Ellen, as you talk about the role it could play in disrupting perhaps the investigation process, where does that go next? I'm sure it's ongoing right now as we speak, as this assassination attempt was only 10 days ago, but do we have a sense of how long it is going to take that process to wrap up entirely?
there are so many different investigations happening. If you to keep track of, there's one independent review that Biden ordered immediately after the assassination attempt, and that's being done by former government officials who've served in Democratic and Republican administrations, including former Secretary Janet Napolitano and others. That has a 45-day timeline. That's what they've committed to. Separately, the Secret Service is doing an internal review that's supposed to take 60 days. At the same time, of course, Congress is investigating. House Speaker Johnson just is putting together a task force that the House is going to vote on this week. That'll be bipartisan. There's no timeline that they've committed to yet on that, but I expect they'll aim to work quite quickly. And then, of course, the FBI is investigating the particulars of the day and doing a criminal investigation.
All right, it's a lot of moving parts, and I'm sure it's a lot to cover. Ellen, thank you so much for joining us as we dissect this breaking news on Cheadle's resignation. We appreciate it and look forward to continuing to see what comes of your coverage as these investigations move forward. Ellen Gilmer of Bloomberg Government covering Homeland Security for us. Now, we also want to continue on with what is, frankly, our top story today, which is the rapidly evolving narrative around Vice President Kamala Harris, now seen as the presumptive Democratic nominee, after locking up the necessary amount of delegates to actually win the nomination at the convention just 4 weeks from now. But we want to look even further ahead, as Harris looks like she will be leading the Democratic ticket and up against Donald Trump in November. As to what markets should be watching for policy-wise, if she actually could be president of the United States, or at least what they should be expecting to hear from her in terms of rhetoric on the campaign trail over the next several months. For that, we turn now to Nathan Dean. He is Bloomberg Intelligence Senior U.S. Policy Analyst based here in Washington, joining me in studio. So, Nathan, you actually have a piece out on the Journal about this that looks into a variety of different sectors. I guess if we can take it from the top, there is this area in which there is a organic flow, and then in the other part, things that can change dramatically under a potential Harris administration, and areas in which maybe there's some degree of overlap. Is it more
think we can get sick of my car. No, you cannot.
Yes, we think it's more
Stupid people just buy all this fake information online.
And we actually had an internal discussion about this and so forth like that, but really comes down to tariffs, trade, and then a lot of regulatory actions after that.
Well, it strikes me on that note that we should maybe just be thinking about, okay, how would Harris differ from Biden, but how much realistically would Harris differ from a Trump-Vance administration, especially on things like tariffs? We know that both Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are fans of protectionism, if you will. We also have heard from J.D. Vance pretty kind words for competition regulators in the U.S., praise for Lena Khan at the FTC. He seems to be supportive in general of antitrust efforts. So are there actually more ways in which the Republican and Democratic ticket may align on policy than you might think at face value?
Yeah, so let's talk about the technology aspect first with the antitrust. Senator Vance obviously gave praise to Lena Khan here at a Bloomberg event here in the office a couple of months ago. And, we don't think that's going to change all that much. This idea of economic populism is going to remain at the FTC, DOJ, probably no matter who wins the election. So if you're in the technology sector, that's certainly that you're going to have to live with now, and you're probably going to have to live with in the future. When it comes to tariffs, don't forget that when Senator Harris was around, she voted against the Canadian-U.S.-Mexico agreement. She voted against the TPP. Now, a lot of that was because of climate change concerns. And so we think that if Vice President Harris were to win, look for the Inflation Reduction Act to be boosted. But when it comes to tariffs, I think you're going to continue with this Biden strategy of targeted tariffs on specific industries to protect American workers versus this idea of 60% general tariffs on all imports coming from China. So I think, the Chinese rhetoric is going to be, tough no matter who wins. But I think that on the tariff strategy, more targeted in the Harris presidency, more broadly in a Trump presidency.
Well, and as we consider what Harris or Trump presidency can bring or might be able to bring, but we also have to consider that it's very much going to depend on the balance of Congress and whether or not you have perhaps cemented control across both chambers or a split government, which makes it hard to get things done. What presidents do have power to do, though, is decide who they want at the helm of regulators. And I wonder to what extent you would expect that Kamala Harris would mean consistency in terms of who is actually at the top of these regulatory agencies, or she might want to bring her own people in to pursue a little bit of a different kind of policy.
I think it's going to be mixed with both. You know, I'm thinking of the FCC chairman, Gary Gensler.
Right. So am I.
I think Chairman Gensler will probably stick around another year to 18 months so that Kamala Harris wins. You know, I think there's a lot of regulatory agency leaders who are like, look, I've been here for 4 years. Let's talk about a transition. So don't be surprised if you see, changing the guards. But I'm thinking of Lena Khan at the FTC, Rohit Chopra, the director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Now that if they get a second term, they're going to run out of the gates, and they're going to say, look, let's run with this and see if we can actually get a little bit more of that consumer protectionism in place. Because remember, when Kamala Harris was Attorney General of the state of California, she participated in a $25 billion settlement against the big banks on foreclosure. But I would always caution, when you talk regulations, you have to remember the courts. Because as the Supreme Court has shown over the last month, it's going to be a lot more difficult to do rulemakings in the future, so always just keep that in mind.
Very good point. As we consider checks and balances here with Congress, there's also the check that can be provided from the courts, as that is the third branch of government, the judicial branch. Very, very quickly, though, when we think about 2025, what's ahead, tax debate is obviously going to be front and center. Considering a lot of the Trump tax cuts that need to be renewed do focus more on small businesses, on consumers, not necessarily the business tax cuts. But Kamala Harris actually, as you talk about being more pro-consumer protection and the little guy, be supportive of renewing that, do we think?
I think so. I mean, just remember, reconciliation comes into play. This is if the House, the Senate, and the presidency goes to one party. If that happens, you're going to see a broad tax debate. But I think ultimately you are going to see, a low, middle income, that individual tax cut that expires at the end of 2025. I think that's going to stay no matter who wins the presidency. It's going to be a little bit more tweaks on things like the SALT deduction, maybe a little bit of corporate tax issues that expired. But ultimately, I think the individual tax rates are going to remain very similar.
All right, Nathan Dean of Bloomberg Intelligence. We're going to be talking to you a lot, as we always do, as we move forward through this campaign cycle. Of course, we're expecting to hear from Kamala Harris just about an hour and a half from now as she campaigns in Milwaukee, so we'll see what kind of policy ideas she puts forward. In the meantime, though, let's go check on world and national news. Amy Morris has that for us, and around 99.1 Newsroom here in Washington. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Kaylee. Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle has resigned after an assassination attempt against former President Trump at his campaign rally. There has been an intensifying outcry about how the Secret Service could have failed in its core mission. Cheadle testified yesterday on Capitol Hill.
The Secret Service's solemn mission is to protect our nation's leaders. On July 13th, we failed. As a director of the United States Secret Service, I take full responsibility for any security lapse of our agency.
Kimberly Cheadle had served as Secret Service Director since August of 2022. Vice President Kamala Harris has enough delegates now to receive the official Democratic presidential nomination. National Convention Chair Jamie Harrison told the Today Show that the nominees will have to be settled before the convention because of Ohio's ballot deadline on August 7th. Harris secured more than 1,900 delegate endorsements last night, and her campaign received $81 million in contributions in the first 24 hours after President Biden exited the race. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
Wall Street prepares for the latest read on inflation.
Supercore PCE, what Powell cares about.
What do the numbers mean for next week's Fed meeting?
The Fed has made a big move pushing inflation down.
Instant reaction on Bloomberg Surveillance.
The market moves, futures explode.
Inflation in focus.
Friday morning at 5:30.
A slower inflationary environment is what we're seeing here.
Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app.
And always on Bloomberg 960.
Context changes everything.
This is the Bloomberg Real Estate Report, brought to you by Realtor. Leading with expertise, following a code of ethics. That's the Realtor difference. We're not doing a lot of home improvements this year. A key gauge is SB's annual spending on home renovation and repair dropping below $500 billion this year from last year's record high. Talking about Harvard's leading indicator of remodeling activity, Carlos Martin, director of the Remodeling Futures program at the center, says economic uncertainty and continued weakness in home sales and the sale of building materials are all keeping a lid on residential remodeling. And Martin also says after several years of frenzied activity during the pandemic, owners are now making upgrades and repairs to their homes at a steadier and more sustainable pace. But Harvard's leading indicator of remodeling activity also sees an upswing early next year. That's a relief for economists since a sharp decline would hit a reliable source of economic growth. And that's the Bloomberg Real Estate Report. I'm Denise Pellegrini.
My friends swim no matter the season, but my moderate to severe plaque psoriasis can sometimes take me out of the moment. Now, thanks to Skyrizi and Clear Skin, count me in. With Skyrizi, Risankizumab Riza, a prescription-only 150 milligram injection for adults who are candidates for systemic or phototherapy. 3 out of 4 people achieve 90% clear skin at 4 months. Don't use if allergic to Skyrizi. Serious allergic reactions and an increased risk of infections or a lower ability to fight them may occur. Before treatment, your doctor should check for infection and tuberculosis. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms such as fever, sweat, chills, muscle aches, or cough, or if you plan to or recently received a vaccine. Thanks to Skyrizi, there's nothing on my skin, and that means everything. Ask your doctor today about Skyrizi, the #1 dermatologist-prescribed biologic in psoriasis, and visit skyrizi.com or call 1-866-SKYRIZI to learn more.
In the fast-paced world of financial services, a compliance revolution is coming. Imagine turning your firm's day-to-day business communications into your greatest asset. What if you could leverage communications data not just to satisfy compliance, but to prevent insider threats, predict risk, and protect against vulnerabilities? With Smarsh, you can. Unleash the power of regulatory-grade AI to stop risk before it happens. Visit smarsh.com/one to learn more. Smarsh.com/ONE. Bloomberg Radio, on demand and in your podcast feed.
On the latest edition of the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast, Sophia Georgia, 0.72.
Is it a normal July? I don't think summers are ever normal. Summers are usually characterized by less liquidity, less news flow, but this is a different summer, right? We have a lot of headlines to react to, and market positioning has been relatively concentrated and sensitive to these headlines. So when you see one asset class move, you can see correlations across others as well.
Inflation. Where are we in terms of fighting inflation? Where's the Fed in terms of fighting inflation, do you think?
So the Fed's probably breathing a sigh of relief. This turned out really well considering we were flirting with double-digit inflation not too long ago. I think the Fed is definitely taking comfort from the fact that the disinflation has reasserted itself. So after a bumpy path the first few months of the year, inflation's back on the downtrend. Fed's feeling pretty good.
77 handle on oil. That's all you gotta know.
Yeah, that's big. So again, does that suggest a September rate cut is in the cards?
For me, it does. I think that the case is definitely building there. And I think what's important for investors to keep in mind is that inflation's coming off, and this is sufficient for the Fed to start dialing back the amount of policy restraint it has delivered to the economy. It's not cutting because the economy is weakening. It's recalibrating the amount of restraint needed because the supply side is doing some of the work for the Fed.
Hear the full conversation on the latest edition of the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Plus, listen anytime on the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
It's 12:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We've got stocks struggling to find direction with the S&P 500 index. Right now, little change has been swinging between gains and losses. 1 point gain right now, up less than 0.1%. The Dow in the red. That's changed since our last update, down 48 now, drop there of 0.1%. While the Nasdaq Composite Index higher by 23, up by about 0.1%. And the Nasdaq 100 Index also turning lower, down now by about 0.2%. The Russell 2000